First of all, I want to welcome everybody to MongoDB.local London. We really appreciate you joining today. I hope you enjoyed the keynote earlier. And my name is Evan Roseley. I'm a lead product manager here at MongoDB. I cover a couple of different teams. I work with our automation team. I work with our ops manager and cloud manager products that help our customers deploy the enterprise advanced deployments. And then specifically on what we're going to be talking about today, I work with our backup teams. So all of the backup teams here at MongoDB, I work with those teams directly. So let's start with a little bit of an agenda. Today we're going to be focusing on what is data resilience. So we'll start off kind of giving an overview for everybody of kind of a general consensus of what is data resilience and what does it mean for your company as a strategy. Then we will look into cyber attacks and deleted data. So basically the reasons that we're focused on these data resilience strategies and some of the impact that they can have and have had to other companies. Then we'll take a look at what we call backup compliance policy and how it really interacts with our holistic backup strategies within MongoDB Atlas, really focused on compliance. And then if we have some time, we'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end here. All right, so what is data resilience? I feel like this is a term that is going more widespread and more people within organizations are talking about data resilience. But generally, not everybody has the exact same description, so I think it's good to kind of set a level playing field about what we're talking about here today. Really what we're focused on is the recovery and continued operations regardless of what happens within the company. So really ensuring that we can get back to operational regardless of the disruptions that happen out there. And today we're going to focus on the backup and recovery pieces of that. But there's obviously the prevention aspects of that as well. So trying to prevent those disruptions from happening in the first place. But like I said, today we're going to focus mostly on the backup and recovery aspect of that. Now the important piece here as we move forward is going to be making sure that we can, whatever we put as our data resilience strategy is something that is easy, turnkey, and automated and works at scale. So that's going to be kind of our continued thought process as we go through this talk, is really ensuring that our data resilience strategy is something that is easily structured and maintained over time. So let's jump into a little bit of the cyber attacks and situations of deleted data. So cyber attacks are on the rise. I think probably everybody is in this room for that reason. It's become a more and more popular topic. We hear about it in the news all the time. We heard it recently in the last couple of weeks over in the US with some casinos. And these attacks are really disruptive to business. And that's really their main goal, is that the majority of attacks are exploitative attacks focused on disrupting or harming the business. They're becoming more frequent than ever. So what we really want to focus on is how much or what we can do to prevent these ever-increasing attacks. And what a survey found in 2022 is that over the last 3 years, on average, every year, so the annual increase was 742%. So that's not 742% for the 3 years. That is each year, cyber attacks have gone up by 742% on average. So you can tell how that would be kind of a very big exponential growth every year on the amount of cyber attacks that are happening. And they're more impactful. So these attackers are no longer just taking the data and selling it on the black markets or things of that nature. They're actively looking ways to compromise companies and make sure that they have more leverage than the company and that the company has limited ways to recover. So they're taking the data, they're deleting the data, they're encrypting the data, they're deleting the backups that the data has so the company has nothing to recover with. So it's becoming much more impactful on companies as they go through these cyber attack events. And some of the hardest hit industries are the public administrations and the healthcare and social assistance. Presumably, these are probably because they have a lot of personally identifiable information, so they have a lot of sensitive data there. But these are just the hardest hit by volume. Obviously, we've heard of plenty of other industries out there. We've had examples, not at MongoDB, but just out in the news cycle of shipping companies where they're going through and investigating the cargo ships we've had media player companies, we've had financial firms, all the way from banks, but down also to financial vendors that support the banks and end up disrupting the pipeline there. We've obviously heard of the casinos in the last couple of weeks being in the news and attackers there. So those are always things that our companies and organizations have to be aware of as we continue to move forward in this digital space. Now, what are some of the impacts of cyber attacks? It kind of breaks down into about 4 different categories. Number 1 is the downtime. So this can range from as little as a couple of minutes up to days, weeks, and in some events, specifically that shipping body company that I mentioned a second ago, they had a downtime for months. So they got partially back up and running for a little bit, but it took them months to fully recover their systems. And these downtimes can be very impactful, especially in a world where we're measured by nines. Days and weeks are really out of the question for the majority of companies. And companies can lose tons of money as they go through these cyber attacks through this downtime. So that's why downtime is generally very impactful to the business, is that the average cyber attack cost about $4.45 million as of a new survey this year for a cyber attack event. Now that could be anywhere from employees' time, having to shift employees over from what their projects are to figuring out what the attack was, how to prevent it, how to recover from that, all the way from actually paying out the ransom to get their data back, regulatory fines, lawsuits. And that's where we see some of these larger, where it says up to hundreds of millions, is actually a real case. In about 2 years ago, there was a company that had to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars due to lawsuit settlements for failing to protect their privacy policy that they outlined to their consumers. So obviously it has a big impact financially when that happens. But if your customers are suing you, you also are probably going to take a reputational hit with that as well. So it's not always that easy to quantify. In that case, they could literally quantify it by the lawsuit. But it's still just as meaningful to companies. So in a world where a lot of companies have their brand and reputation as one of their differentiators and spend millions and sometimes billions of dollars to maintain that reputation and gain that business, this is a really important piece to it. And just think of something as simple as new features that we have on our phones where consumers are protecting their own email addresses, right? Something as simple as having an email address, consumers are getting much more protective of. So think of something now like social security numbers or credit card information. If that type of information leaks out, it becomes a giant brand reputation risk for these companies as we move forward. And then finally, developer productivity. So this might be the most important depending on who you talk to in your organization. But usually in cyber attacks, it's a all hands on deck situation, right? First, we have to stop the cyber attack. Then we have to figure out or how do we recover from that cyber attack? Where was the attack from? How did they gain entrance? And then ultimately, we have to figure out how to prevent that in the future. So it takes a lot of time from developers when we have these attacks, and we really need to address those. Now, cyber attacks happen, right? So in a survey by IDC from I think it was a 12-month period from 2020 to 2021, they found that almost all of the organizations that they surveyed had some sort of ransomware attack in 2021. The probably more surprising note is that about 35%, so over a third of those companies, had had 3 to 4 incidents in that 12-month period. So think back to that 742% annual increase, and you can start to see how this is only going to continue to grow as we go into the future and gain more. So let's talk a little bit about some of the disruptions and data losses and where those can occur. We've already touched on one of it with being the cyber attacks, but there's other pieces like catastrophic failure. So if you have all of your data in one region, maybe it's a cloud provider region, maybe it's a certain data center, that system is vulnerable to catastrophic failure. So think of something like a flood or a fire that still happens and can affect different even cloud regions. that can take down all of the servers or all of the hardware that you're running, and then you have nothing to come back from. The second is, like I've been mentioning with the cyber attacks, obviously those are gaining prominence and gaining different ways that, again, the cyber attackers are affecting the data. So again, it's no longer just selling the data, but it's also going through and deleting it or encrypting it, or even in some severe scenarios, deleting the backups themselves. And then another aspect that isn't talked about as much, but is just as prominent, is human error, right? So these are the places where maybe a developer accidentally deleted some data or released some code that they didn't know would have an effect on the system, and maybe it corrupted some data. So these are all common examples, unfortunately, and these errors can propagate often within seconds to the rest of the system. So there's no time to really just stop that deployment and then fix it. The system and the data is usually corrupted by that point. So digging into a little bit more of the kind of cyber attack world, there's also another vector that I wanted to talk about, which was the bad actors. So it's really notable, especially for the IT teams who are looking to prevent, and security teams who are looking to prevent attacks from the outside world. We also have to look at potential bad actors internally. And the reason that we worry about those so much is that it only takes one time for them to succeed. They generally know the systems. They know how to operate within the system. They know what privilege they have in the system. Maybe they know where some of the weaknesses are in the system. So due to that, we also need to make sure that we can prevent from these bad actors internally, again, destroying the data or deleting backups and things of that nature. Another piece, again, as I mentioned, is human error. So we've all heard to err is human, and that's still common in the digital technology space. And there's generally two common outcomes out from human error. One is that it actually attributes to the cyber attack breaches. Now, it's not generally somebody maliciously contributing to that, but it's usually their human error, something like a misconfiguration of the system, allows for an area that a cyber attacker can come in and get into the system. So nearly 13% of actual cyber attack breaches involve some sort of relation to human error or misconfiguration. The other piece is just accidental mistakes, as I briefly touched on. So it could be deleting the data. Again, it could be accidentally changing something in the system, or maybe purposely changing something in the system that has an effect that they did not expect. So maybe changing the configuration of the cluster has an effect on the overall backups that developer is not aware of, and maybe it accidentally deletes the backups. And this can cost companies millions of dollars, even just in that case, because regulatory fines where needing to have a certain amount of data for a certain amount of years. So these are all aspects that we want to keep in mind as we go through our data resilience strategy and come up with a structure for our organization as we move forward. And the difficult part is each are unique, right? So with catastrophic failure, you can try to do some prevention there with maybe multi-cloud or multi-region or multi-data centers, but that doesn't help you when it comes to deleted or corrupted data. And within cyber attacks, they're endlessly trying different vectors and probing on different areas. So it's always hard to understand where that next attack might come from, but we need to have everything we can, again, in place to try to prevent that. And the security piece is all designed about that prevention. So what can we do to prevent those disruptions to start with? But once those disruptions happen, how do we actually recover from that as well? And what I hear from a lot of companies is that we have a recovery process in place. We have backups. We can get ready to use them. Well, a startling, I think, kind of fact from one of an IDC survey is that actually less than a quarter of the attacks that happened that they surveyed from were able to recover using backups. So companies thought that they had a backup in place, but when it actually came down to using that backup and getting back up and running, only 23% of those companies were able to do so. There's generally about two things that cause this. One is that, again, attackers are becoming more sophisticated and they're deleting the backups. They're purposely targeting these areas. so that they know that these companies can't recover and they have to come to them to pay off the ransom or something. And then the other piece is organizations not fully understanding their recovery process. So maybe there's a system in their full recovery stack that is not backed up or not backed up properly. Maybe there's also an aspect where the company thinks that they understand what their recovery process is, but they haven't tried it out very frequently. And when it comes down to the time, instead of it taking under an hour like they expected, maybe it takes multiple hours or even days to actually get back up and running. And all of that contributes to downtime, which again then contributes to cost as well for the organization. So any delay in that recovery process is extremely important for our organizations as we move forward. And because of all of this complexity with the trying to understand data resilience and how to instruct that, we're seeing more and more frameworks and regulatory regulations come around really designed to focus on this and help foster organizations into a better posture so that they're prepared for these incidents. So one of the ones that we have on screen here is Appendix J, which is popular in the financial industry if you're working with the United States or have a United States-based arm. This is something that most financial industry have to keep up with. And while it is a little bit general, they mention that you have to maintain a relatively current backup. They are focused on the part of making sure that it's without risk of attacking or destroying and corrupting the data itself. So ensuring essentially that you do have backups to recover from and that it is accurate from the point in time that you believed that backup to be from, right? We want to make sure that they're not corrupted by attackers or anything of that nature. Now you may have heard similar in the same vein talking about maybe like immutable backups or worm, which is write once or read many. All kind of revolves around the same process. We want to ensure that the backups that we have are the backups that we'll be able to use and we can have full confidence in that data that we're actually backing up with. There's other popular frameworks out there as well. There's NIST, that's more of a general guidance for companies about data security and resilience. There's also here in the EU different regulations like DORA that apply on the same level. So now let's take a little bit of a look of how this may affect actually developers, depending on the system and the data resilience strategy that we have, right? That's one of our main focuses is making sure that developers' productivity and efficiency can be maintained. And while I believe that all developers really want to ensure that we have a good data resilience strategy, they do have some concerns about what this actually looks like. So is it turnkey? How long will it take me as a developer to implement this strategy? Is this going to be something that takes hours? Do I have to learn different systems? Do I have to become a data resiliency expert when it comes to this? Another piece is, will it work at scale? I haven't talked to a company recently that hasn't said that their data is going to grow. Most companies are saying that their data is going to at least double in the next couple of years. Some say double or triple in the next couple of months. So we know our data is going to continue to grow, and we want something that will continually be a strategy that works regardless of the scale and the size of our clusters or our data. And then finally, we want something that's all in one. Again, is it going to be multiple systems that I have to tie into existing systems, or is it something that's going to be all in one place that I can fully understand? Do the developers have to learn how to now maintain multiple systems if it is multiple systems there? How do they work together? If I need to upgrade one of those systems or they have a new release, how does that play into the other system that it ties into, right? That maintenance is a very big hassle if we have multiple pipelines that come in there. So now, how do we support this in MongoDB Atlas? Again, our whole purpose is to make this as easy as possible to support your data resilience strategy. And specifically for the rest of this talk, it's going to be focused on the backups. So how do we support backups and making sure that the backups are there and accurate to what you actually expect in the time of needed recovery? Our goal is to make it automated and policy-driven. So everything around our backups, we want it to be basically a one-stop shop where you don't have to think about it every day. We want it to be something where you set it up, and then you can let the system follow the policies and the guidelines that you have given it. So as I mentioned, we want it to be a one-stop shop. Now, for a holistic strategy, that's going to include our continuous cloud backups, which are your point-in-time restore in MongoDB Atlas, so allowing you to restore to a very specific time that you choose. Another piece of this would be enabling the feature of multi-region snapshot distribution. So this allows you to copy your snapshots from your primary region to any other region for the cloud provider that you have in Atlas. Next would be downloading and exporting your snapshots. So we know that some companies and regulations are required to keep their snapshots and their data also in a offline premise. So we allow that as well. Again, we all focus on this on a policy-driven. So we've introduced a new feature this year that is really focused on the security of this piece, but ensuring that it's all policy-driven, and we'll get to that in a second here. So diving into each of these features a little bit more specifically, starting with continuous cloud backups. As I mentioned, this is a point-in-time restore capability. So really ensuring that you can choose exactly the moment that is best suited for your organization, depending on the attack and what happened, that you can get back up and running. So we can use either the wall clock and point to an exact minute, as you can see up here, or we can also use an oplog timestamp. And what this allows us to do is if we can pinpoint the timestamp that maybe the delete activity occurred or the cyber attack infiltrated, we can then pinpoint the timestamp right before that and have our system recover everything up to that point so that we're getting as much data back as we can before that error happened. And through MongoDB Atlas, this offers an RPO or recovery point objective of 1 minute. So what that means is that we guarantee that you have all the data from a minute ago all the way back to a pre-configured time window. So you can have multiple days of this point-in-time restore, meaning that, let's say, a day ago you had an issue that you just found out about. You can pinpoint that timestamp and then go back all the way for that day. Again, that's a configurable range that you can set there, but we're guaranteeing that you have everything from at least 1 minute ago back to that time. And then, as I mentioned, the granularity of this is 1 second. With the timestamp, you can actually get down to specific milliseconds that you have if you know your timestamp. So it gives you very granular control with the system and how you can recover. The next feature is the multi-region snapshot distribution. As I mentioned, this is basically the ability to copy your snapshots to another region within MongoDB Atlas. So by default today, your backups live in your primary region for your cluster. Now, that region goes down for whatever reason. Maybe the cloud provider has an issue. If you only have backups in that region, then you won't have access to your backups while that cloud region is down. So therefore, the backups aren't quite as useful in that case if you can't access them, right? So with this feature, we allow you to copy your backups to any other region in Atlas for your cloud provider. And it's not related to where your cluster lives. So regardless of whether you have a single region cluster or a multi-region cluster, you can still pick any other region that you prefer to copy your snapshots over. So in that example that I said, if an entire cloud region went down, you will still have access to your backups as you go forward. And even though that region is down, you can choose another region to deploy into with these snapshots. And you can also change this by a certain snapshot type. So depending on the organization or depending on your application within your organization, you may have different needs. Some companies may want to copy over their hourly and daily snapshots so that they can use these just to recover quickly. Other companies may want to copy over maybe their monthlies or weeklies because this also allows you to have a faster restore in that other region as well. So maybe you have a dev or a test environment in a second region and you want to be able to restore very quickly with your production data to start testing over there. And you only really care about that every week or so that you want to refresh that environment. you can choose to only copy over the weeklies. So this gives you good control over the additional cost that you would have by storing your backups in a different region. And you can also move over the point-in-time restore, so the oplog that comes with this as well. So if you've chosen to be able to restore for 3 days in the past, by enabling this piece, you can also ensure that you will have those same 3 days of oplog and same recovery ability within your secondary region if your primary region goes down. Another piece, as I mentioned, companies have requirements, multiple different requirements for archival purposes or air-gapped pieces for their data. So we offer the ability to download and export your snapshots as well to meet some of this criteria. So the first one being download, you can download this to a self-managed server. Again, it takes the data that you have in MongoDB Atlas and downloads it directly to whatever server that you choose. Again, some companies, depending on the organization, focus on this with, like I said, air-gapped or having to have your data on multiple different types of media for long-term keeping. So this allows you to satisfy that requirement. And then also we can export your backups to AWS S3 buckets as well. So what this is really designed for is an archival purpose. So you can take your backups off of MongoDB Atlas if you want, and you can store those in your own S3 bucket. So it gives you the ownership of that data because it's in your S3 bucket, not a MongoDB bucket. And it also gives you a unique ability to use that data as you want in the future because we export this data out in JSON. So by exporting this out in JSON, it means that it's not tied to a specific MongoDB version or really MongoDB at all. So some companies that we've talked to have said, okay, we have a requirement for all of our vendors that we need to be able to operate with our own data regardless if that vendor is continuing to operate or continues to exist. So with this, you can fulfill that requirement of ensuring that you have access to all of the data by exporting your backups out. Again, it'll be in that JSON format, and then any type of structure that accepts JSON format will be able to use this data in the future, right? And that could be the case for maybe 10 years down the road. You still want to restore back into MongoDB, but now there's a version compatibility concern. Well, it's in a JSON format. You can still deal with that, and it's not something that's not available because it's on an older version. So all of this is great, but we need to ensure that you actually have access to all of this and that attackers or maybe a mistake by a human doesn't wipe out all of this, right? Backups are great if you set them up appropriately, but they're only relevant if you still have them at the time that you need them. So one of the things now that we've introduced earlier this year is called a backup compliance policy. And this allows you to strictly enforce all of these rules within MongoDB Atlas and guarantee that data resilience for your backups. So let's take a look at how that's done. With the flip of a switch, it's actually a toggle in our UI, but you can enact this backup compliance policy and set this up for every cluster in a specific project. So one policy covers one policy for the project covers every cluster that's in that project. And the way to think of the backup compliance policy is it's basically a minimum requirement that all clusters in that project have to have as far as their backups are concerned. So it's the minimum schedule and the minimum retention. And also with this, anything that is in that minimum retention window cannot be deleted by any user. So that's the big piece here is that we're setting basically a time frame that we're requiring these backups to be in our system, and they cannot be deleted or moved or done any of that before this time period has expired. So it's completely customizable. You can choose whatever snapshot frequencies that make sense for that specific project. And again, it's just a minimum. So if you have clusters in there or application teams that require a higher retention for any of these, they can build on that in their own cluster level backup schedules. So this is a minimum piece. And we've had customers that have this. The two best examples are customers that want to set themselves up to ensure that every cluster in that project can restore back to maybe the last 3 or 4 days. So they ensure that they have hourly or daily backups set for all of the clusters. You can also do your point in time with this as well, so you can require that every cluster has that point in time restorability for a certain amount of days. Another example of this would be more in the regulatory space, where financial companies generally have a requirement maybe for 7 years or something to hold their financial data in the past. Well, you can go in here and set that up and say, okay, I want my monthly snapshots to always be retained for a minimum of 84 months, right? So that makes sure that you, as an organization, don't have to worry about being out of compliance. Maybe an application team doesn't have a full understanding or is new, or you have new employees on a team. This ensures that regardless of what happens, you can set these boundaries that make sure that you're in full compliance at all time. And again, it's compliance for every cluster that's in the project itself, and you have that granular control by each snapshot of how you list it out for each project. And you can change this by project as you want, but again, it applies as a basis to all of the clusters in there. You can also require encryption for these clusters as well. So you can require that all of these clusters have encryption at rest with your own keys as well, so that the data itself, even in the backups, even if someone got into the backups somehow, that the data itself is encrypted. So this offers complete protection. It cannot be turned off. So once this is turned on as a feature, there's nobody in your organization, regardless of role, including the org owner, that can turn off this feature on their own. And we require an authorized point of contact. It's one authorized point of contact. And the reason we require an authorized point of contact is that this is the only person that can request for this feature to be disabled. Again, it does not disable it on their own. They have to reach out to our support team and work with our support team to go over a multi-day verification process before this feature can be disabled. And we really try to narrow this down into one person, because that limits the range of attack possibilities, right? And that's also why we have verification on this person when they contact support. So we take this very seriously and make sure that it's actually not an easy process to disable this feature to give you the compliance and security that it needs. And this begins immediately. So that was the entire setup flow for this policy. Obviously, you need to take time to figure out exactly what that policy should be, but it's not hard to enact. So as soon as you hit confirm and save, it'll be enabled on your projects in the project settings. And again, it's protection everywhere. It prevents that deletion before any of that time period has passed. And you can see here, I was the one that was the authorized point of contact. And even though it shows that I was the one that made that change, that I can't disable this in the UI, I can't make any changes, I have to contact that support team, and I have to be the person that is that authorized point of contact. You can also see here on the cluster snapshot page itself, you can see at the very top, there's that green box that informs users that there is a backup compliance policy active. It gives them more information. If maybe a developer is not aware of what that is, they can click off to the links. But it also blocks out the ability to delete the individual backups before that retention period has passed. And it gives you a warning as well as to why that is the case. And this is also protected in not only the UI, but also the API. So if you have an API delete request, you'll see an error come back and say that you cannot delete these snapshots because of the backup compliance policy. And I like to think here that this also can help educate different team members as well, because if they did make an error that would have deleted a backup, or they tried to delete a backup early, this will give them a warning that you're trying to do something that's not allowed by the organization and by the policy. So it should kind of get them to go reach out and figure out what is in that policy that they did, or what was in that action that they took that would have caused maybe a backup to be deleted, or why is this earlier than what our organization wants. So as a recap, our goal is enterprise protection that's built in, right? Again, our focus is having that automated and policy-driven, setting up that schedule from the beginning, and really understanding what is going to be protected and making sure that all of the clusters in that project have that, and you don't have to look at it on a day-by-day basis. And we want it to be turnkey and at scale, right? Simple to set up, something that doesn't take hours. You don't have to have a intense background on how to set up different data resilience and security programs. It's all done within MongoDB Atlas, and it can be used at any cluster, regardless of the data size or the amount of clusters that you have in a project. Really allows us to maintain that developer productivity, allow developers to focus on the features and the things that are making money for the business and the new features that are coming out, and not have to worry about the data resilience or worry that they're going to make some action that might get the company out of compliance by accidentally deleting a backup or having something that was deployed that made your data corrupted. So you can rest assured that your backup data has that data resiliency with this type of strategy in place, and you don't have to worry about that on a day-to-day basis. So next steps. The QR code here is a white paper that talks about everything that we talked about today, but it also includes the security aspects of data resilience. So there's a lot of really good information there to show you some of the features that are available, again, native to MongoDB Atlas. And you can read all about that there, and it has links out to the different documentations for some of those features as well. It also gives a couple of example setups in that white paper as well that may be useful for people that haven't really thought about data resilience strategy yet. And my last question would be, if you don't have a data resilience strategy set up today, when is the time that you're going to set that up? Hopefully it's not after the next cyber attack attempt, right? We really want to be proactive on all of this and make sure that all of our systems, from securities but also to backup, are secure before something happens and we actually need to have that in place. So I think we have a couple of minutes on QA. My timing is a little, yeah, we have a couple minutes here. So if anybody has any questions, I can answer some now. I'll also be to the side if you don't want to raise your hand. I'm happy to answer some things afterwards. We do have lunch coming up, so I understand if people want to run to lunch maybe a little bit earlier. But happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. Yes, sir.
If you back up to an S3 bucket, can you have that encrypted as well?
Yeah, good question. So the question was, if you export your snapshots to an S3 bucket, can you have that S3 bucket encrypted as well? The encryption would be up to your organization because it is your S3 bucket that you would be moving it to. So that's entirely up to you. If you do have encryption at rest already turned on with customer keys, the data itself will be encrypted, right? Yeah. Yes.
The human element here is the person who's a single contact. Now, stuff happens to people. They win lotteries and horrible stuff happens to them too. Have you got a strategy in place? What happens if that person is suddenly no longer with the company, or for whatever reason, they cannot be that point of contact anymore? Is there a process in place for that?
Yes, so good question. The question is, with the authorized point of contact, something may happen to that contact. The contact maybe leaves the company or something of that nature. So what's the process there? So as I mentioned, to ensure that it's the right person and nothing, maybe they're not a bad actor or something, or somebody's infiltrated that. That is why we have a multiple day verification process with our support team. So we do verification processes with that email to ensure best to our ability that is the right person. It also gives you time as an organization, if something has happened to that account, to let us know, right? So that verification process fills in there. And if you do need to change the point of contact, that is possible. We will have to go through basically a documented process to have basically from your legal team to show us that it is the right person, or if it maybe before they leave, we can change it through that process. So we have ways to do that. None of them are easy, but it's on purpose because we want to make sure. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, one of the concerns we have is that even with perfect backups, some time may pass if you've got, say, a malicious actor who starts corrupting the data. Some time may pass between that starting and the point that we discover it. And so even if we restore just immediately before
Yeah, so the question is essentially, if something does happen in the past that you have to restore back to, there's presumably also good data that you want to maintain and also recover that happened after that deletion point or corruption point. So to your point, there's a bunch of other security aspects to this, right? Today we were just focusing on backups. There's absolutely a lot of different security pieces that a good data resilience strategy will have in place to detect, be able to understand what is corrupted, what's not, what was affected and what's not. So the white paper that was up there, and we can get you a link afterwards, but has a lot of good aspects on that. As far as recovering some of that data, what you can do is also take backups in the future, right? Because backups didn't stop. They're still automated and policy-driven. So you can take backups in the future, restore it to a different cluster, and then once you've figured out what data is valid and what data is corrupted, you can take basically that data and import it into your live production cluster, right? Obviously, you don't want to restore that to your production cluster. You want to do that investigation first. But you can absolutely restore it to the side, do your investigation and piece, and then only pipe in what's you determine is good data. We have about 3 minutes, so any other questions? Yes?
Just a quick one on the export to the AWS bucket. Is there a way to automate that process?
There is.
It can happen automatically.
Yep, you can automate that as well. Yep. All right. Well, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate the good questions. There is a feedback QR code here. I think it's literally 5 questions. It takes 30 seconds. You don't have to, but we would love it. It really helps our talks and helps us figure out how to improve these for the future. So if you have time, that would be great. Otherwise, I really appreciate all of your time and enjoy the rest of .local London. Thank you for joining us.